Hello there and welcome to today's edition of China Now. This is the only show that affords you an opportunity to learn and understand exactly how China works, how China thinks, and how China views itself and the rest of the world. So as usual, we'll start off with the first segment of the show, China Currents, which will introduce you to a very important subject matter. Now, did you know that artificial intelligence leverages computers and machines to mimic problem-solving and decision-making capabilities of the human mind? And also, have you ever wondered how the ChatGPT AI writing app really works? I'm sure you've heard so much about this app, but you're still wondering and struggling to understand how this app really operates. So, on today's edition of China Currents, we'll have our regular host, Kris, all the way from China, explain to you in very clear and concise terms how exactly the ChatGPT AI writing app really works. And from there, Lisa will come your way with today's very educative segment of Threshold. Threshold is the segment of the show that focuses attention on state-of-the-art technological innovations in today's China. On today's segment of Threshold, Lisa will focus attention on how artificial intelligence could aid in medicine discovery. So, without further ado, let's get started.
China Currents is a weekly news talk show from China to the world. We cover viral news about China every week and also give you the newest updates on China's cutting-edge technologies. Let's get started. Hi, welcome to another episode of China Currents. I'm Kris. Apparently, ChatGPT is all the rage now. Even in China, where the service is blocked by the government at the moment, perhaps out of fear of exposing the public to Western propaganda. But the public interest is huge. Everybody becomes a techie overnight and starts to talk about how brilliant or dumb or dangerous this piece of technology is. Many folks are so eager to get a taste of the future that they actually make the effort of getting a VPN and a foreign phone number to play with the chatbot. Needless to say, the tech sector is thrilled by the possibility that they have stumbled upon a new goldmine represented by ChatGPT. For decades, search engines have enabled tech giants like Google to rake in the money and shape our way of navigating the internet, to the extent that they become synonymous to acquiring information. Want to find out about something? Google it. Now Microsoft has thrown down the gauntlet with OpenAI chatbot, who can not only fetch, integrate and compare data from various domains in a flash, but also present information in conversations that humans find natural. And Chinese companies like Huawei, Baidu, Tencent, Alibaba and iFlyTech are all scrambling to announce similar AI projects to rival ChatGPT and Google's Bard. So the race after the next big thing is in full swing now. However, outside the tech industry, lay people like me often have mixed feelings. Some of us, especially college kids, be like, oh, this shit is dope. Good riddance homework. True. ChatGPT is more than capable of ghostwriting an undergraduate essay that is more form than substance. While some others are more fearful of the possibility of losing jobs in the near future, the only solace they can take from this phenomenal chatbot is that it doesn't always have right answers for every question, yet. So there's still need for human proofreading. At a current level, even the most advanced AI chatbot can only give you answers that look nice-ish, but if you examine carefully, probably not that fabulous in terms of accuracy and conciseness, not to mention originality. Just like most of the stuff most people do for a living, day in and day out in their long, dull careers. Think about it. If you have a rough idea of how ChatGPT works, which I'll explain, you probably would agree that even if it may not be able to replace you now, it's better to be clear-eyed about AI and more generally about our relationship to technology. First of all, ChatGPT isn't really smart. Not in the sense that it understands things and is able to tap into a pool of structured knowledge, retrieve a certain portion that deems appropriate and reformulate a meaningful feedback through user interface. No. ChatGPT is actually clueless about anything it turns out. It just programmed to play a computational guessing game of which words would real humans choose to complete a sentence. When you dissect a language, what you find is a probability network of words occurring, each under the condition of previous related words that have already occurred. That's the statistical structure of a language. So essentially, ChatGPT is little more than a mathematical model that is able to predict the linguistic outcome of the highest probability based on existing patterns and connections. For example, after computing and comparing the probability of the word Trump appearing after the word Donald against that of duck following Donald, given that the word before Donald is president, the machine will conclude that President Donald Trump is a better choice than President Donald Duck, even though it doesn't understand why birds are not eligible to be elected to the highest office. If you feel what ChatGPT says makes sense to you, it means the language model it's built on is large enough, and the algorithm is accurate enough to make good guesses. And in order to do that, developers have to feed chatbots with vast amounts of data. Ideally, you want to shovel the entire internet down the bot's throat. But you might worry that certain materials are toxic, just like the way educators take issue with textbooks. So you want to take those inappropriate stuff out of its training diet in a process called reinforcement learning from human feedback, or RLHF, so that the bots won't become offensive jerks after graduation. It begs the question of who should have the authority to decide what is to be included or excluded from a syllabus for machine learning. In other words, who is the minister of AI education? Now, Western conservatives are already worried that ChatGPT leans toward establishment liberals. They are afraid that future AI will make their kids woke. It's indeed difficult to draw the line between abusive language and free speech, between conspiracy theories and healthy skepticism. Where's the standard? What if I'm not happy with your community guidelines? What if I don't agree with your censorship in RLHF? Good luck telling that to the Silicon Valley, see if they have any empathy to those fighting on the opposite side of the culture war. In an age of competing narratives and alternative facts, there's not a singular set of truth to be accepted universally. Which reminds me of the Gutenberg printing press that effectively ended the Catholic Church monopoly on truth. What is held by some to be objective facts may come across to others as cherry-picking propaganda. Now you see why the Chinese government has reservations about a seemingly innocuous chatbot, because it's concerned with the textbooks or curated data used for the bot's training. Since what is right to me is wrong to you, how could I be sure your AI provides correct information on contentious issues? As US and China drift towards technological bifurcation, brace yourselves, because socialist chatbots with Chinese characteristics are coming. Anyway, even though at its current level, artificial intelligence is more artificial than intelligence, there are dangers we can't afford to overlook. Every time I see those huge AI posters during my daily Shanghai metro commute, I find it incredible and sad at the same time that such elaborate artworks, way better than anything I could ever paint, can be generated by a simple line of instruction containing thematic and stylistic keywords. Say, a quiet forest path in the style of 19th century German Romanticism. Et voila! Now, AI can already produce artworks, compose music, reply emails, write essays, edit news, and even generate program codes. Assume that technology will improve at the current rate and ask yourself, does your line of work require genuine, outside-the-box, uppercase creativity? Most likely not. We deal with practical problems all the time. To solve them, we just need to analyze to find the trigger that evoke the right part of our highly compartmentalized knowledge and apply it. But the central question is, can we read more, organize better, and respond faster than a machine? If not, how long will it take before your last bit of competitive advantage over the bot disappear? They are more than capable of conjuring up seemingly creative, but in fact synthetic stuff for mass market consumption with much greater cost effectiveness. What's going to keep them from robbing us of our jobs? And I'm not talking about entry-level, rote, repetitive tasks, but really knowledge works at the higher end of the value chain that demand years of accumulation and practice, like law and medicine. as well as those that are currently spared by industrial automation, which had already killed much of manual labor. Is AI the 21st century spinning jenny that's going to obliterate white-collar jobs? I don't know. Probably we'll become data labelers, AI trainers. We all have a bright future, don't we? I believe things are mostly manageable at policy level if decision makers become more thoughtful. But there's one thing I find deeply unsettling, which is the way we look at technology. Oh, sorry, there's no we or any unanimous opinion, but generally those at the dispensing end of technology tend to be overconfident that current human predicament arises from too little rather than too much technology. To them, the only way forward is to use technology to enhance humanity to achieve its full potential in a distant future, even if it means many will be condemned to misery today. Does that sound tempting to you? Well, it depends on whether you're the one who have mastered technology to create endless new scenarios to extract more profit from people, the earth, or the universe. And those of us at the receiving end tend to be overjoyed by how technologies provide us with shortcuts in life. You don't have to read books. AI can read them for you and instantly produce a well-balanced review in your writing style. The same goes for any other work. Will you put your name on it and pretend it's your own? Yeah, what's the big deal? The knowledge is there. You only utilize it more efficiently. The AI didn't do anything extra. You'd probably produce exactly the same thing if you were given more time. But if we do this all the time, we stop reaching out with curiosity and stop producing honest work that reflects our minds. We're actually cutting short of life's journey that was supposed to give meaning. The fact that we are human and we do things we do has value in itself. Discarding this essential part, what's left of us? And I'll leave you to it. And thank you for watching this episode of China Currents. If you want to learn more about China and have any thoughts and comments on our show, please contact us at the email address below. And looking forward to hearing from you. My colleague Lisa will now take over to introduce more exciting technologies from China. Lisa, please.
Thank you, Kris. Hi, my name is Lisa. This is Threshold in China, a segment that gives you a taste of the future before it actually happens. We're going to talk about emerging technologies that have life-changing potentials and assess their readiness for mass deployment. Today, we're going to talk about how AI could help medicine discovery. AI, or artificial intelligence, is now everywhere. AI programming, AI chess player, AI news anchors, AI cars, AI generated content, and chatbot. Now AI is starting to make a huge impact on medicine discovery. It can help scientists to predict which chemicals are most promising to treat a specific disease and their potential impact on the proteins in our body. This can make medicine discovery a lot more efficient. A team of scientists from the Chinese Academy of Science in Shanghai has applied AI in an innovative way to push the boundaries of medicine discovery. Hopefully, this could shorten the lengthy period, as well as reduce the cost and, most importantly, cut the price of the medicine and make the cure more affordable to everyone. Living in the post-pandemic world, I think this is good news for all of us. Well, what are they actually doing? Let me briefly explain. When using AI, you need to get two things right. Choose the right algorithm for the problem you're dealing with and feed it with a huge amount of quality data. Let's start with algorithm. Drug chemicals work by interacting with the proteins in our body. Whether these type of protein are on the healthy cells or tumor cells. So a crucial step in medicine discovery is to find the candidate chemical with the desirable interaction. Once we found these chemicals, we need to know what exactly they could do to the proteins and specifically which parts of the proteins the chemicals are going to bind with. It is a lot like a key, that's the chemical, and the lock, which is the protein. You fuse them together to get a reaction. To understand what is going on with our chemicals and the proteins, we need to know the structure of the proteins, and preferably in fine detail. And there's the problem. The structure of the protein is always highly complicated and in several dimensions. The basic dimension is the sequence of amino acid, which is what the protein is made out of, but it is not a straight line. They tend to twist and turn and fold into higher dimensional structures. For most of the known proteins, we only know their sequence of amino acids, but that's far from enough, and this is where the Shanghai team led by Jiang Hualiang comes into the picture. Now, before we go on, I need to introduce something called a transformer. It is a type of AI algorithm commonly used in understanding text. It can learn context and guess the meaning by tracking relationships between words in a sentence. Words need to be arranged in a certain sequence to have meaning, and that's a sentence. And likewise, amino acids in a protein need to have a certain sequence to give it a specific structure, and in turn a certain function, such as interacting with chemicals. The transformer can read the sequence and predict the function of the protein, and Jiang's team modifies the transformer to improve the prediction. They call their new brand of algorithm Transformer CPI, which stands for Compound Protein Interaction. They also build new datasets specific for CPI prediction. Well, now we move on to the data. You may have heard this: data is the new oil. AI needs to be fed this kind of oil. The more data there is, the more powerful the machine. But the problem with applying AI in medicine discovery is the amount of useful data is very limited. When collecting data concerning the structure of chemicals, Jiang's team was confronted by the reality that most of the public structure of chemicals are like this. But by AI standard, this kind of structured representation is ambiguous and hence hard to work on. The traditional formula only shows the composition of atoms and their relative position. But to predict the chemical functions, AI needs to know the detailed properties such as bond length, bond angle, and potential influence of neighboring atoms on each other. To overcome this problem, Jiang's team used another type of AI algorithm called attentive FP. It has an attentive mechanism which allows the method to focus on the most relevant parts of the structure to achieve a better prediction. Compared to other algorithms, attentive FP is more capable of evaluating the impact of neighbor atoms and modeling a wide range of molecular properties involving physical chemistry and physiology. In this way, the formula from patents and other scientific literature accumulated through the last centuries can be automatically converted into something AI could work with and sorted in an online database. And that is available to the public. However, the pharma industry is not known for sharing. The data about chemical and physiological properties of each compound are highly valuable assets, and thus well-kept business secrets for pharmaceutical firms. Such knowledge could give them an edge over other competitors. To tackle this issue, Jiang and his colleagues teared a page from the banker's book. The finance industry faced the very same dilemma. On the one hand, the ever more powerful algorithm trained with large quantity of data could no doubt benefit the financial institutions when they're trying to use it to predict the market trend, the creditworthiness of certain type of clients, or the risk of investment, etc. On the other hand, there are just not enough data openly available and nobody wants to share it. Then guess what? AI can help to get around that barrier. Specifically, it's something called federated learning. It allows each institution to train the same algorithm on their own server holding local data samples without exchanging them. Or let's put it this way, they share the algorithm instead of data. The performance of algorithm is greatly improved as a result. Jiang's team has just launched this version of federated learning algorithm for predicting water solubility of compounds. With all these clever and promising techniques, there are still some hurdles to cross before AI could really be the game changer that is hyped. The first is data. As data scientists always say, garbage in, garbage out. If you feed the algorithm with flawed data, you will not get what you want. Well, the Shanghai team has laid some groundwork in this regard. More is needed. And then there's the question of how to build on the findings of AI. There is still a long way to go after potential targets of chemical reactions are identified, such as how to follow up and verify the findings, convert them into feasible medical options. Alright, now is the assessment. Let's go on to the threshold rating. Here in this program, we have a set of criteria to assess the readiness, novelty, and the potential social impact of each technology. When a particular technology scores a 3 or above in all 3 dimensions, it reaches the threshold of potential having the substantial near-term real-world influence. The first is readiness. Consider that most of the measures I mentioned have already been applied to actual medicine discovery process. Sometimes jointly with pharmaceutical firms, the readiness is really high. It is a 4. Then comes to the novelty criteria. The algorithms being used are adapted from publicly available variants. The improvements are significant, so here's a 3. And finally, the ripples. The team has demonstrated creativity when dealing with data storage, which may set a good example and inspire others to follow the lead. That could greatly change the landscape of the industry as the cost of drug discoveries goes down and more players could enter the field. So it is a 4. 2 4s and a 3. It exceeds this threshold. It seems like AI and machine learning will continue to help further drug discovery and manufacturing. And as AI tools become more accessible over the years, the future will be AI-enabled. Of course, the future social impact of any technology depends on how it is used, whether to benefit the society or to bring harm. What could you do if you have all the secrets of chemistry at your fingertips? We look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you.
Well, many thanks to you, Lisa and Kris, for bringing us today's edition of China Currents and Threshold. But now, let's turn our attention outside of the studios. On this segment of the show, you may hear many voices. It could be voices of entrepreneurs who are starting their businesses from scratch, or it could be voices of our friends living or studying in China, or it could be that of thinkers and scholars who may be sharing their brightest ideas about China and the rest of the world. So, stick and stay with us as we bring you more details on this segment of the show.
There's a tendency now for Chinese opinion makers to become quite disrespectful of Western policymakers because they're beginning to fear that everything that is being said is just designed to confuse and to essentially to make things more difficult for China. Graham Allison had debates with Chinese scholars, and he comes over as a person who's very sincerely interested in avoiding war, which is good, which is what Chinese people want to do. But I became concerned that it was taken seriously in China, perhaps even more concerned that it was taken seriously in the United States of America, because what he essentially argues is that war between China and America is inevitable. That's not merely a pessimistic message, but I think it's a very dangerous message, because if you think war is inevitable, then all you can do is fight it. There's no alternative peaceful way. But second, it has the effect, because of the reasoning he offers, of putting the blame on China for the tension. But in a subtle way. Many anti-Chinese commentators in the West say that we don't like China because China has done something which we judge as morally wrong. Now, there's a lot of questions you can ask about the moral standard of a nation that was built on slavery. But anyway, they seem to think that they have the right to judge what everybody else does. But Graham Allison doesn't say that China's doing anything wrong. What he says is the problem is that China is growing. So almost, and I think this is the reason for the interest of Chinese scholars, he says the problem is China is doing too well. That China's rise is a threat to America's world position. And he makes a historical analogy, and this is where Thucydides comes in. He talks about ancient Greece in the 5th century before Christ, which is 2,500 years ago. And he says there was a very famous war called the Peloponnesian War. And this war was fought on Greek territory. Now, in fact, I'm going to suggest that that's the first historical error he makes. It wasn't fought on Greek territory. It was fought in the Mediterranean. But this was because the dominant power in Greece was Sparta. And Athens was a rising power. It wasn't as strong as Sparta, but it became quite wealthy quite rapidly. And this was perceived as a threat by Sparta. Now, the famous historian that everybody refers to when they want to talk about what happened in that war is a man called Thucydides. And Thucydides many people think of him, at least in the West, as the father of modern history. He's the first person to actually attempt to record historical facts as accurately as he could, to give a narrative which wasn't just a story, wasn't just like Homer, who is wonderful to read, but is essentially just saying, this is the legend. He's saying, I'm attempting to ascertain what really happened. And he was himself a general, so he was involved in the war. So a lot of the incidents he was talking about, he knew because he was there. Thucydides is very widely trusted as a source. He had a history of the Peloponnesian War. He makes one remark where he says, once Athens began to rise, war between Athens and Sparta was inevitable. Then he makes an analogy. He says, everywhere you get a dominant power and there is a rising power, there will be a great power conflict between the rising power and the previously dominant power. Therefore, he then extrapolates and says, China and the USA are like Athens and Sparta. Now, I'm very concerned because particularly finding this was taken very seriously by a number of Chinese scholars. And it's, first of all, it's not true, even if you forget the history. If you just look at the causes of the China-US conflict, it's just demonstrably not true. The reason is not China's rise. The reason is America's decline. Okay, that's the first reason. And nothing China can do can stop America's decline except persuade America to become more like China, in which case it will succeed and stop worrying about declining. But they resist the idea of becoming like China, and therefore they carry on declining. And that decline is the real cause of the growing gap between China and the USA. You see, if you say Sparta equals the United States of America and Athens equals China, then you're saying this is a battle between a slave-run state that used to put its children out to die on the hills and only kept the ones who survived because they were going to be warriors. That's the USA by this analogy. And Athens, the center of world democracy, is China. So that's a little bit of a problem for the USA. But the second problem is that it wasn't Athens' rise that provoked the dispute. It was when Athens converted itself into an empire. And the historical record on that is very clear. Athens was a naval power. It was not a land power. And you only have to look at the role that ships play in Athenian history. Or I will just show you the map of the Athenian Empire. So that's Athens. Now, this is Greece on the left, this little block here. Sparta is down the bottom here. Athens is, you can see, it's on the east coast. And Athens' allies, or its colonies as they call, these little black dots, went all around the Aegean Sea, including all the way up to the Black Sea, incidentally, all along the coast of what is now Turkey, but was then Persia. It was a Mediterranean power, and it was attempting to set up a Mediterranean empire. And the key moment in the war, which is when Athens started to lose, is when the rulers of Athens converted this green arc here. They converted it from a defensive league against Persia, not against Turkey, against Persia. Over here, it became a big land power in only 50 years before the war broke out, and that was then the big threat. They converted that into an empire, and they went on a disastrous military expedition to conquer Sicily when they failed. And the leader of that expedition, Alcibiades, then deserted to the Persians. Well, nothing like that has occurred in modern history. It's a completely different sequence of events. And the cause was Athens converting itself into an empire. So if there's any lesson to be drawn from this, it would be that under no circumstances convert yourself into an empire. That would be, to me, the lesson that China, which I think is drawing from it. I don't see any indication China has any aspirations to become an empire, quite apart from anything else. It can see what happens by looking at the USA if you try to do that. So the historical analogy is wrong and the current analogy is wrong. So it's not true in terms of today's events, but it's also not true in terms of the real causes of the war between Athens and Sparta. And it's not true that every time you have a rising power that threatens a dominant power, the dominant power fights with the rising power. And a very classic example, there are many, and there are many from Chinese history. Chinese historians have pointed out that there are many incidents in the rise of the history of China where this simply does not apply, that the dominant power doesn't say, oh, we're going to fight you. They say, that's quite interesting. Maybe we can learn something for you. Maybe we can work together, have a bit of a battle and then sort things out or whatever, right? there's a very famous political military leader called Philip of Macedon, and his son was Alexander. And that was a territory to the north of Athens. And Alexander, as we know, was victorious against the Persians, actually crushed the Persians, created an enormous world-spanning empire. It was always in indirect contact by the kingdoms and polities that came between. But Alexander essentially, reached India and came in direct contact, opened up the trade routes. It's sort of predecessor of the Belt Silk Road. You can read many debates in Athens about what to do about Philip. And there's a debate, and the debate had a majority in favor of saying, well, Philip's quite a good thing for us. He will create stability, and we'll not have to worry about fighting all these people like Sparta and so on, because we'll be part of somebody else's empire. So let's do it. And in fact, Allison, who wrote the book about the Thucydides trap, he cites many examples in which countries did go to war with each other because of great power rivalry caused by the rise of a new power. And there's a lot of theory around that, world systems theory, for example, about the succession of hegemons and so on, which I think is very suspect. But anyway, most interesting is all Allison's examples start from the dawn of capitalism. There are 1,500 years between ancient Greece and the examples he's citing. He says nothing about relation, for example, between Rome and Germany, or Athens and Alexander. So that he's picked something which is specific to an era of history which is very different from the era of the ancient world. It's a big historical era which is known in history, and Alice, I'm surprised that he doesn't know it. To suppose that simply because something applies under one set of economic and social and historic conditions, it applies under all of them. In fact, I think the causes of the conflicts that he cites are not the inevitable rivalry between great powers, but capitalism. Capitalism is an inherently competitive system. So it's all about getting your share of the wealth, getting your share of colonies, and driving the other guys out of those colonies so that you've got the more power. So Columbus, for example, the origin of Columbus and the conquest of America was that the Ottoman Empire dominated Eastern trade. So the capital, the rising cities of Venice and Genoa, the Mediterranean cities who traded with China, could only trade via the Ottomans. And the Ottoman Empire also had big access to sources of gold, which was very important because it was used for trading, and silver. So they set out to the west because they wanted to find an alternative route, originally an alternative route to India. So it was motivated by competition from the get-go, from 1492 onwards. Then successive countries rose to dominance. England was perhaps the first. Holland, it's argued, or the Netherlands rather, was perhaps the first seagoing hegemonic power. Then England and France rose. Then England became the dominant colonial power. There's no question of it. And they really developed modern capitalism. Then you have rising challenger powers. You have Germany, you have America, all of whom basically were at odds with England and wanted to replace it, either to fight it or to dominate it. So the causes of the conflicts which Allison traces are really the rivalry between capitalist powers. Now, that is a problem with the United States because it's a capitalist power. So it's inherently competitive, but that's not China's fault. That's America's fault. Now, I'm just going to see if I can share a graph that kind of illustrates the problem. This is a graph of the GDP, as the gross domestic product, the output, the economic power of the United States. And it starts in 1950 and it goes up till today. You'll see it's declined continuously, basically since 1950. It has a series of crises which correspond to well-known events. I'll give you one example. You look at 1974, there was a big crash. Growth went down from 6% to 2% and stayed between 2% and 3% for a long time. And there was a big economic slump in 1974. It was very famous at the time. It was the first occasion on which there had been a slump of something like the scale of 1929 in the West. Then it recovered. How did it recover? Well, it launched a full-on attack on the rest of the world by the policies that we know as neoliberalism. It shot up interest rates. It drove many countries that had been developing quite well, such as, the countries of Latin America, many African countries, drove them into debt and used debt to impose on them policies that basically meant they would become exporters of primary goods, exporters of products of cheap labor, and that the West would maintain its technical dominance. And that was very effective. It increased US power growth back up to 4.6%. But look what happened. It crashed right down again to an even lower level before. Next, we get, the overthrow of the Soviet Union. Big gain, big temporary leap forward, crashing the Soviet economy, which is the true cause of the rise of Putin, because, it was a terrible thing for the Russian economy, as one of the main architects, Jeffrey Sachs, now admits. Well, immediately after that, it falls again. And then there's this is what happens after the Asian financial crisis, when what the US basically did is it got out of a big financial mess by trying to get the Japanese and Koreans to pay for it, which they did in the so-called Reverse Plaza Accords. Then you have 2008, and it's crashed to a level of something like 0%. And it went up for a bit. And every time it goes up, you get the journalists saying, we're on the recovery road, we're back on the march. But if you look at the way that they describe the figures don't support the theory, because the period in which it was supposed to have been doing wonderfully, it was actually expanding at a rate of 2.5%. This is the lowest peak. If you look at the tops of all these things, they keep going down. So this is the lowest peak in post-war history. So the United States is in, historically, a very bad position economically. And that's what's driving what it does. Because it has two means of reinforcing its strength. One is, which it tried in the 1960s, to attack its own working class. So there was a big onslaught on basically American wages and trade union power in the 1960s. And what did you get? 1968. You got the explosion of discontent. You got the intersection of the Vietnam War and the civil rights movement, which originated, one should not forget, in the trade union movement. Martin Luther King, who was the most famous spokesperson for the civil rights movement, started off very clearly in the defense of workers' rights, because that's where most people of color in the United States get their living, because of the oppressed condition they find themselves in. The attempt to solve it by attacking the working class was catastrophic. It provoked the 1968 rebellion, threw American society into enormous difficulties. And every time that the United States attacks its own working class, it runs into significant internal difficulties. Sometimes take very right-wing forms, as, for example, Donald Trump, but it runs into difficulties. So the other method is you get the rest of the world to pay for your problems. You use your economic clout, which is essentially your technical superiority, to force them to supply you with cheap raw materials, products of cheap labor, minerals, agricultural, basic products. That's imperialism. That's what imperialism is. And this was very well described by an Indian economist in the 1920s, 1924, a greatly neglected thinker called M.N. Roy. And he simply says, look, the rich countries of the world, they didn't call them the West at that time, they just called them the rich countries, they exploit the labor of 4/5 of the world. But the poor countries can only exploit the labor of their own country. So they obviously have an enormous advantage. They've got the whole world working for them, but the whole world doesn't want to work for them. And so you have this almost gut reaction that has come out after the war with Russia, the Ukraine-Russia war, where country after country, including countries one would not have expected it if you just judge it from the moral standards of the USA. Countries with quite right-wing governments, authoritarian, repressive governments, Saudi Arabia, India, are saying, no, we're not going along with this. And the recent visit of United States plenipotentiaries to Africa was a complete disaster. That these African leaders that they confronted, who were being told, go along with us and fight Russia, said, no, we're not going to. We like working with China. We like working with Russia. It's better than what we got from you. So there's a general atmosphere of revolt amongst that 4/5 of the world who says, we're fed up being made into the solution for America's problems. Now, the danger that China presents in this respect is it shows that you don't have to. It shows that you can develop your own economy. Justin Li Fuyin put this very well in a contribution I read, in which he calls it the new economic model. Some people, I'm included, would say that it's actually socialism, which is the view of the Chinese government, and I basically go along with that. That it's more economically successful than even the United States. Now, this is a first time let's call it a country of the global south or the third world, has not merely challenged the United States, but is getting out of the trap that the United States puts everybody in. It's not allowing itself to be the exporter of primary goods. It's surpassing the USA in many areas of technology. I don't want to exaggerate, because the true standard of technological achievement is not just how many patents you have, but how well your people are doing. But you see, the policies of China have done enormous amount to eradicate the lowest levels of poverty, and I think will, in time, now probably begin to eliminate the inequality which has grown under the marketization of the Chinese economy. And that's a phenomenal technological achievement. There's no country in the world has raised so many people out of poverty in such a short space of time at all. So this is the real threat that China presents to the USA, is it's not allowing itself to be ground down by the USA. Now, then the question is, what can you do? China can't stop the USA's decline. It can contribute to the solution by giving an example that hopefully American people will start to follow. And I think that's a very real possibility and has to be worked towards. But ultimately, the solution lies in the hands of American people and the European people. And the answer consists of saying no to the USA. Can't do it that way. Can't carry on the way you've done. You're going to have to try something else. So this is the sort of main conclusion I came to.
Welcome back to China Now. I hope today's edition of the show has been very informative, educative, and exciting for you. Through the show, we're hoping to show you a different world, a different culture, and a different way of thinking. And as usual, as I always say, let China not be far away from you anymore. If you still want to know other things about China, please do not hesitate to reach out to us or contact us through the email provided below. Thank you so much for watching today's edition of the show, and see you same time next week. And until then, it's goodbye from myself and the entire team. Have a great weekend.